Good evening. My name is Jack Cummings, and I am the co-founder and artistic director of Transport Group Theater Company. I'm currently in our office in Midtown Manhattan, situated on the land of the Lenape people. Thank you to everyone for joining us for this evening's panel, Twin Cities on the Ground. Last year, we held a similar discussion, and we wanted to revisit this topic 1 year later with so much changing in the world. I'd like to take this time to especially thank Marcia Pendelton from Walk Tall Girl Productions for putting tonight's panel together. We are incredibly grateful to her. A final reminder, all donations received tonight benefit the Black Theater Network, an organization we are thrilled to support. Now I'd like to tell you a little bit about tonight's moderator. Professor Michael Dinwiddie currently teaches at NYU. He has taught courses ranging from African-American theater history to dramatic writing, to filmmaking, to ragtime music, to name just a few. Professor Dinwiddie is also a playwright who has served as the playwright in residence at both Michigan State University and St. Louis University, as well as receiving a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship in Playwriting. We are honored to have him with us tonight. Please welcome your moderator for tonight's panel, Professor Michael Dinwiddie.
Thank you, Jack, for that really great introduction.
Absolutely.
I am
great to see you, Michael.
So thrilled to be in Manhattan with you. I'm coming to you from the land of Lenape and other indigenous people who have inhabited and continue to have a presence on the island of Manhattan. We pay tribute to those who have survived the genocides, the miseducation, and the stealing and destruction of their homelands. Our hope is that in the coming years, we will learn the lessons that made it possible for so many indigenous people to live on this land in harmony with nature and with each other. I am so honored to moderate this evening's conversation with two amazing individuals who will share their perspectives and insights. And I just want to say, their bios are so long that if I do their bios, we'll be here just doing that. But I want to give you an idea of what we're going to do tonight. I'm going to introduce them, ask a few questions, and then we're going to leave time at the end for you to put your questions in the chat, and I'll get to as many of them as I can. So first, I'm going to invite Signe V Harriday to come. She's a fierce, visionary, and powerful storyteller who crafts theater that awakens our individual and collective humanity. As a director, multidisciplinary artist, activist, and facilitator, she uses theater as a catalyst to ask questions about who we are and who we are in relation to each other. She's a co-artistic producing director of Pillsbury House Theater, which I can't wait to talk about. She's a co-founder of Million Artists Movement, collective of artists committed to Black liberation. And this is the team I really want to join, the Subversive Sirens, Synchronized Swimming. I know I'm not in that kind of shape, but I would love to be part of that. Founder of Root Springs Co-op, a retreat center for BIPOC artists, activists, healers, and co-founder of Mama Mosaic, a women of color theater company whose mission is to evoke positive social change through female-centered work. There are other things I could tell you about Signe, but you can go online and find her and her wonderful products. Welcome, Signe.
Great to be with you. Thank
so
you,
glad to
Michael.
have you. So glad. And now I'm going to introduce this other guy who I know a little bit. His name is Harrison David Rivers. Again, a long bio, but I'll keep it as short as I can, Harrison, because I know you're in London. I don't want to keep you awake listening to your own bio, okay? So he's the winner of the 2018 Relentless Award for his play, The Bandage Place, which was done at New York Stage and Film. Produced plays include When We Last Flew, he won a GLAAD Media Award, New York Fringe Excellence in Playwriting Award, New York Fringe Diversionary Suite, Aldelco, nomination for Best Play, National Black Theater, and She Would Stand Like This, 20% Theater Company. It goes on and on. It's so amazing. And what's even more wonderful is Harrison is working really hard right now on two different series for HBO. That's really remarkable and wonderful. I first came across Harrison's work with Broadbent, Arkansas for Transport Group. That's how I was introduced to working with that and learning from him. And he was named a runner-up for the 2018 Artist of the Year by the Star Tribune and the 2017 Artist of the Year by City Pages. Some of his fellowships, McKnight, Jerome, Van Leer, Emerging Artists of Color, residencies with the Bogliasco Foundation, you'll correct that for me, the Siena Art Institute, the Hermitage, and Duke University. He was playwright and residence at the Williamstown Theater Festival, and he's an alum of the Public Theater's Emerging Writers Group. He graduated from Columbia School of the Arts. So welcome, Harrison.
Thanks, Michael. It's great to be here.
It's so exciting to have you here. So what I'm going to do is just start with some questions, and at the end we'll spend time, we'll make sure we leave time so people can ask you the questions they're interested in. So the first question I want to ask is the one that I know nothing about. Before we started, Signe started talking about the farm. And so I want to know about this farm that sounds like a place. I mean, I hope it has to do with what we're talking about tonight, because I don't know. So bring me up to speed, Signe.
I love that. First of all, thank you so much for that introduction, Michael. It's really great to be here with you and with Harrison, and for all the folks who are watching. And I think your first question is awesome because it takes the backstage front stage. You try to have a little kiki over here, and then people are like, what you talking about? So if you're watching, all things are on the table. But the farm that you're referencing is called Root Springs Cooperative. It's here in the Twin Cities. And actually it was something that was birthed with a mutual friend of Harrison and I, Aaron Sharkey, many years ago. As Black identified artists, we were wondering, where is the space for us as artists to find respite, find care, find a sense of well-being, to connect with each other, to connect with nature. We know that the land can hold things that we can't hold on our own. And so we started to dream about what a retreat center might look like. And we did lots of research. We were looking all up and down Hudson Valley and everywhere else, and did a bunch of case studies. And then June, a little over a year ago, a former spiritual retreat center steward reached out to me and said that they were interested in transitioning their land ownership and stewardship to BIPOC folks. And we said, oh, is now that moment? I guess the dream that had ended up on the shelf after some dashed hopes is now coming to fruition. And I think
the future became the present immediately.
It was like, what? And that was in June, a year ago, June. And we moved to that land in February, Michael.
So where is it?
It is 75 minutes northwest of the Twin Cities on 36 beautiful acres of diverse landscape, everything from wetlands, a small lake, prairie, woods. And what I'll say about it is, as I think about the title for tonight's conversation, we have been shouldering a lot, holding so much. And as artists who I would say, and I don't want to speak for you, Harrison, but I think many of us have known for a long time, it is our voice that pierces through the silence, that brings connection to each other in the world, such that we can live out our lives with the deepest sense of humanity and respect. And that for so many of us, whether it's the American stage or the screen or our block or the halls of politics or the powers of wealth, our voices and stories have not been there. And so we have had to fight to pierce in and or create, reach back to our ancestral knowledge and our community senses of knowing to tell our stories. And it's a gift, but it's also hard work. And so care and respite needs to be a part of that story. And so this space is doing that so that artists can come and have some healing, have a chance to relax. And this is no shade to the many retreat centers that exist that are stewarded by white people. Thank you all for sharing the abundance of your resource, but it feels different to be greeted on land that is being stewarded by Black and Brown people for Black and Brown people.
Well, you just gave us and created an acronym. You didn't mean to, but I was sitting here, you said care and respite, C-A-R, and I added every day, so that becomes care. And you're exactly right. And we're in a moment in the culture where we are starting to understand how we have to hold to dreams.
Yeah.
Hold fast to dreams, for if dreams die, Life is a broken winged bird that cannot fly. We get Langston Hughes as the man who gives us that. And the shouldering, the doing that, our voices piercing the silence, exactly what you said. So that, thank you for telling me about the farm. I can't wait for the invitation. I'm sure that they're.
It is open. It's
okay.
open. Rootspringsmn.org. You can book online, boo. Come on through.
I hear there are cows. Is this true?
The cows are not ours. They're our neighbors' cows.
Okay.
But they're there. They're there in proximity. Yes.
And we have guineas, and we have cats and dogs. Come through.
I thought with the great migration, we had left the cows behind, but I'm glad to know that there are cows there. So
we're finding our way back.
Okay, thank you. Now that's excellent. That's a great point, because you both have a holistic approach to your art and in your work. And so I want to talk about this idea of what's the social issue that you feel that you've had an impact in terms of what you've done? And then what do you want to happen? So Harrison, I'll start with you.
Oh gosh, impact. I don't know. I have a hard time maybe thinking about what the work is doing. I think I have a lot of hope that the work is doing something, and that the thing that thing is doing is good, is healing, is shedding light on a narrative or a group of people who have not had much time in the sun. I think that much of my work is very personal, or it comes from sort of experiences and stories that are closely held, that are heart stories, that are body wounds. Like that's where the stories come from. So I think that there is something to the sharing of the personal, of telling one's truths or sharing one's truths and meeting other people in those places of truths. I think that we don't talk to each other enough. I think that it's hard to talk about the hard stuff. And then I think if you can't talk about the hard stuff, then it's hard to celebrate the good. So I think that all of it sort of needs to be on the table. And hopefully the work that I'm making is helping us to get to a place where we can really unpack and share sort of across the spectrum. That
I don't want to interrupt you, but you're talking about the kind of balance that we're all looking for, that the farm is part of that, but then your work claiming space for queer men, interracial relationships, young people. I mean, all these things, in some ways you can think of it as being very brave. In other words, you can think of it as being claiming self and basically giving. Is there a particular experience that you look back to where you said, this is the work I must do?
Actually, when I was a student at Columbia, and I was a baby writer, I was sort of a story lover and a theater enthusiast who had found my way to a grad program and felt a little bit lost. I think maybe partially because I didn't go into grad school with much of a plan. It was more a thing to do, and it might have even been more of an escape from real life. And so I was in grad school for lots of reasons, and I don't know that any of those reasons were to actually figure out what I should be telling stories about. But I think during my time there, it became very apparent that there were very few people who looked like me, and all of the people who looked like me in my program at the time were sort of floundering because because we were working with materials that didn't speak to us and didn't necessarily automatically include us. We were sort of being thrust into things and sort of shoved into things that maybe weren't the best fits. And so while I was at Columbia, I think I really had the sense that the five of us share something. and that doesn't mean that we are exactly the same, but we share something, and there is a power in that, and sometimes it helps if there's somebody to put some words to that, and so that became a thing that became incredibly important to me, was putting words to that sharedness, and acknowledging the diversity of that sharedness, but really putting words to that sharedness. And so I would say that before Columbia, my work was perfectly fine. I think, as perfectly fine writing, but was not specific.
Okay.
I think that anybody could have been in my work. And I think that after Columbia, I think I was writing for a specific people, and I think I was writing with specific people in mind. And I think that I left Columbia with just a greater sense of purpose and seeing a need and working my butt off to fill my corner of that need, if that makes sense.
It makes total sense. And what I love about what you said, I love the idea that you weren't even sure why you went, but you found your purpose. Part of it has to do with the fact that we're all maturing and changing based on the environments we're in. But then to be young, gifted, and I won't add that one. The last one, you can pick whichever one you want, whichever word you want. There is also a challenge because, in fact, you're taught to be invisible. You're taught not to know your own thoughts. You're kind of taught away from yourself. So I think it's interesting you're working on this project for HBO, Invisible Life, based on the Elin Harris work. So I think that's going to be very exciting. So Signe, I want to ask you now. You work, one of the groups I saw, you work with Mama Mosaic Theater, and I went and looked at Maria Carolla. If you could tell us a little bit about that, because it's so interesting to me, this whole notion of activism, how it becomes personal and personalized. If you could talk to me about how you found Maria Carolla and what Mama Mosaic Theater is.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think I won't necessarily speak to Maria so much, but I'll speak a little bit to the question that you just asked Harrison about, like, how and when did you know? And for me, wow, it's a funny thing to figure out where to start the story.
Yeah.
I don't envy
all night,
playwrights.
right?
I do not envy playwrights trying to figure this out. But I think that I had grown up in a house that believed in storytelling. I'm the daughter of a minister and understood the power of ritual and how theater can be an extension of that kind of experience that we have oftentimes in houses of worship, where a story illuminates something for us that helps to guide our steps going forward. And so I think I had a spiritual like calling to make theater, and I was in a household that understood the complexities of race and class. And so that felt like it was always in there, but maybe not so explicitly. And then I was shortly out of college and was performing for Color Girls at Penumbra Theater.
Which color were you?
Well, it's an interesting thing. We actually did not stay true to a specific color. We worked together as an ensemble and chose the pieces under the direction of Kim Moore, an incredible director who's still directing, and the choreography of Joel Branner, an incredible artist who is doing amazing things in the world as well. And we were so blessed to also have Lori Carlos, who is an ancestor now, but was instrumental in helping me understand my own voice as an artist. And she was there with us and helped to guide us in this process of figuring out who should do what. And that was a life affirming, spiritually nourishing, transformative production for me to be in. And I was young. And at that time, auditions in the Twin Cities was actually still in the classified section of the newspaper. So you would go to the classifieds, it was called the 550s in the Star Tribune, and you would look where the auditions were coming, and then you would sign up for the next audition. Like, that was how we did it. Newspapers, y'all, it was like a real thing. And I remember going to the newspaper and realizing there was not another production. There wasn't a part for me to, and I had already known that like our voices were missing and like all of that, but like it just got so real. And in the dressing room of that theater is where Mama Mosaic was birthed, which was 3 of us were like, we need to keep telling stories. We have to do work that means something to us. And so the first thing that we did was a free Mumia public event, right? So you talk about storytellers who are working in that sector and how important his work and continues to be. And of course, his health, we all should be concerned. And so back then there was a free Mumia event. Must have been 98 or 99. And we did this event, and I don't like a curtain call at the end of a thing. I just want everything to just be the work and leave. And I was coming out from behind, and a woman had been waiting for me. And I'll never forget it. I get goosebumps just thinking about it. She grabbed me and she looked me in my eyes and said, "Thank you. I've never seen or heard myself on stage before." And that was the moment when it all sort of solidified, when I understood the power of reflection. And now, as someone who is an abolitionist and someone who is trying to make sure that my work is steeped in a Black liberatory lens, I understand that we both need to reflect the stories that help to affirm our humanity, but we also need to practice imagination. Because if we're going to get free, if we are going to have the innovative ideas and the ways of living into the world that we want, that's going to require imagination, and that's going to require collective energy. And the theater is one of the last places where you can be sitting by a stranger but having a joint experience, and that to be across all kinds of demographics. And I think to get to the places that we need, we're gonna need to get better at doing that.
I think those are, Harrison, you want to say something, please?
Well, I was just going to say, I think that that's another reason why Root Springs Cooperative is so important. Like these spaces away from the hustle and the bustle and the pressures and the everyday demands, these places of rest and respite where you can actually slow down. You can actually take the time. You can be in your body. You can reconnect yourself to the source, and then allow yourself these moments of dream and imagination and these wild fantasies, right? That then end up being attainable. I mean, Root Springs Cooperative, I'm sure, was a dream, was an imagination, right? It was a co-imagining that then, out of the blue almost, even though you had imagined it into being and you were ready to go when the opportunity presented itself. But if you didn't have that space with Aaron and others, that sort of safe space to dream big and say, what would we want? What kind of world would we love to be living in? And what do we need to make that world?
Yes, but I would say that your work as a playwright and the stories that you tell are doing the same thing. They're also like affirming us to say, I have permission to love myself. I have permission to love someone else. And I think that, like growing up, I'm a lesbian. We did not see our stories. We did not hear our stories. So it was one of those things where it was like, am I real?
Right.
Am I allowed to be me?
Yeah.
And even if like the me on the stage now that I help to try to hold these stories to share for people, doesn't have to be my specific story, but even that we need a plethora of versions of Black lesbians such that it can affirm all of the Black lesbians. I mean, that's the work, right? Like your imaginings and your characters also give life to us. And that's like so healing.
Yeah. The work has to be the space where we embrace all the selves and all the different ways that we have of thinking of who we are. One of my favorite characters in history is Angelina Grimke, Angelina Weld Grimke, who wrote Rachel in 1916, lesbian poet, playwright, and how important it was. And she was reaching out always in her work to try to connect with others. And so I think about this kind of notion that Du Bois had. He said, art is propaganda. Right. But Alain Locke says, write whatever you want. Don't worry about how it lands in the world. I just wonder, as you start to think about this kind of, I don't think those are real contradictions. I don't think there's an issue with that, because all art is political. Art is all, I mean, the ancient Greeks even, understood that the intelligence, the necessity of creating this environment where you could share stories with each other. So Signe, I just wanted you to talk a little bit about Pillsbury House, the house settlement, because I love this idea that comes out of this settlement house tradition that when I first came to New York, I worked at a place called Grand Street Settlement House. It's 2 blocks from Henry Street Settlement, which was an arts settlement house. But of course, they started with the idea of helping people acquire the skills to survive in this new land. So tell me a little bit about Pillsbury House.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. For those of you who don't know, Pillsbury House and Theater is a professional theater based inside of a social service agency in the Twin Cities of Minnesota, grounded and rooted right in South Minneapolis. We are a part of a collection of other organizations and have been for 140 years. Now, the theater hasn't been in existence for that long, but the legacy of settlement houses and being in community service and relationship with community is that long. And I want to name that being on Dakota and Anishinaabe land that was stolen away from Indigenous people, we have work to do. Like, the settlement history isn't a perfect narrative of like, yay, we're happy here helping. Like, let's also remember it was also a part of a colonial settler project. And so we're working the repairs of all of that. And I think, as someone who is a descendant of folks whose labor was stolen and also a descendant of folks who benefited from the colonial settler project, I feel like I'm at this beautiful opportunity to talk about the complexities of that. And certainly our history and legacy as Pillsbury House is that. But it is also one that celebrates what does it mean to be in service of community. And there was a recognition that we are as a community stronger when we're in service of each other. So how do we build justice? How do we build freedom? How do we build economic power? How do we build imagination? How do we build justice? Has been a part of the history and the legacy. And Ralph Remington created Pillsbury House Theater and really stepped in and said that arts and culture are a part of that narrative as well, and need to be. And I think, you already hearkened back to some ancient societies, but you would be hard pressed to find an ancient society that didn't have artists as a part of the fabric that made the community whole. So
what?
We see.
What are you saying?
Shocking. I know. Don't give me you over there in London. And I think it's real powerful to say that we have got our funding priorities out of whack on this continent.
Yes.
When it comes to art, because we have relegated art to the masses as the luxury class, the extraneous, as opposed to our perspective at Pillsbury House and Theater, which is we are the core. We are what brings community together. And in the building that I'm sitting in, I feel so honored to say that we are home not only to a professional theater, but an early education childhood center. We are home to other organizations serving the community. We are supporting adults living with cognitive disabilities and creating arts-infused programming for all of our populations. Folks in New York know the 52nd Street Project. We have our version of that, award-winning Chicago Avenue Project. And so we are not in proximity to theater, of community. We are community.
So I got to show off a bit. I'm going to show off. Okay.
Come.
Because I have the Pillsbury mission statement and the vision statement and the values all right here. I'm not going to read them all, but I'm going to pick. I just love the vision. We imagine thriving communities where creativity is the catalyst for building personal, social, and economic power for all. But then the element you have, kindness. We believe positivity, empathy, and compassion are revolutionary acts. And those are the 2 pieces I wanted to share from the Pillsbury, which is fantastic. I mean, Ralph Remington, 1992, starting this company, but it's just amazing that this is built into the DNA of the place.
Well, yeah, and I would say too, we've become a place that is home to exceptional artists as a result. Mm-hmm. Being accountable to community and being in relationship with community has made this a place where countless artists have had a chance to find their voice, share their voice, build community and connection. And in this last year, I think that was called to task and to term. It was, we in the Twin Cities, under the weight of so many pandemics, really understood that our role as artists was integral. and that our skills as artists, you know, that the ability to empathize, the ability to imaginate, the ability to create, was what in part got us over some of the greatest hurdles that we faced in the last year and a half. And there is still much sorrow, and there is still much healing. And our production of What to Send Up, when it goes down, Alicia Harris's incredible piece created with the Movement Theater, we produced that this summer here outside in our parking lot. And we're located, for those who don't know, on 35th in Chicago. You may know this intersection or this area because it is just blocks from the public lynching of George Floyd. And so we have been at the center of so much pain. And so a piece like Harris's that invites us to be in ritual and connection, to heal, to grieve, to find Black joy, and to be unabashedly for Black people, to Black people, about Black people, from Black people, has been an important piece for Pillsbury to steward. And we're actually going to be doing the production again here in just 2 weeks.
Good.
So
I was hoping.
Yeah, please.
No. This is Alicia Harris's play.
Okay.
Well, I guess it's not even really a play. It is more a ritual, more an offering.
Tell us what it is. Help us understand. We haven't seen it. I don't know.
Oh, I don't know if I'm the best person to. I mean, so yes, I will. But first, I want to say that when I read that Pillsbury House was presenting it, that you were producing the piece, I was so excited because it actually feels like a perfect extension of the mission, of the vision, but also of how I've always sort of thought of Pillsbury House. I think that in the Twin Cities, there are these beautiful sort of beating heart organizations,
Yes.
Organizations that feel like heart organizations to me. They feel like the heart is central to what we do. I mean, of course, the head is involved and the feet are involved, but the heart, that's the thing that you see from above. As you're flying over the Twin Cities, you see those beating hearts, right? And I think Pillsbury House for me is one of those places, and Penumbra, which has a bit of a similar history in that it is,
Yes,
a theater inside of a community center. There are these beating heart organizations. And so this piece, this not really a play, a ritual, an offering, felt like a perfect sort of extension of all of the values of the theater. And I actually think that that's a great, a sort of a genius like programming. It's not even a move, because it just feels like a natural, organic, and right offering. I just wanted to say that.
That is so fantastic.
That's what I experienced when I found out that you all were doing it.
Well, what's fantastic about all of that, first of all, I'm glad you brought up Penumbra, because it's so important to pay tribute to Lou Bellamy and Sarah Bellamy and the company and what they're doing there. There's such fantastic theater in Minneapolis, St. Paul. In a minute, I'm going to ask you guys about why that's happening. You know, it's kind of like Winston-Salem. Why is it there? But that's okay. But the point I want to push right now is that what you talked about, Signe, is that this comes out of the involvement of the community. And Colored Girls came out of Henry Street settlement. It came, well, bars and lawyers, but Woody King, using CETA money, creating a theater company that then goes on to create a piece, Colored Girls, which then really resonates in a way that's still coming. It's coming back to Broadway in the fall. There was a great production of it, The Public. Camille Brown is going to be directing a production of it.
Alvin Wilkes is up in there.
It's going to be fantastic. It's going to be remarkable. But all that to say, where our theater locates is where our communities are. And when you think about Your Arms Are Short, the Box of God, we just lost Mickey Grant and her amazing work. Don't Bother Me, I Can't Cope. I mean, starting off at the Urban Arts Core Center, and so we can go to Broadway. That's fine, but the origination has to be with these small theaters that have not been. Recently, with COVID stuff, the Broadway theaters got $10 million each to basically get them through their crisis. The little theaters, as far as I know, I don't even want to mention the numbers. They're the theaters that have been vital to the culture, to making sure that the voices are heard in a way and nurtured in a way where they're actually the voices coming from those communities. And what we know is the point you make, Signe and Harrison, is that those stories reach everyone. Those are the stories of our culture. And so we've had this strange idea and the thing. I mean, you talked about it a moment ago, the theater's for the rich, it's for the powerful, it's for those who can afford $200 or $300 ringside seats. But in fact, we know, coming out of our tradition, we created the theaters that have been the lifeblood for the communities that we come from. And you think of Karamu, you think of the theater Penumbra, you think of theaters all over the country. And the one that I go to, I live 1 block away from, I say this in everything I do, Bleecker and Mercer Street is where the African Grove Theater, 1821, the first Black producer's first theater. William Brown creates it. James Hewlett is an actor there. Ira Aldridge becomes an international star. NYU is building a building on that site. It's going to have 5 theaters in it. And my mission is to make sure that one of those theaters is called the African Grove Theater. So I may have just lost my job at NYU, I don't know, but I don't care, because to me, that's much more important. And I'm enlisting the whole world to know that we want that to happen in the way that we have to mark where we are. We have to, this is, Community Board 2 here in New York just declared this area where I live, the land of the Blacks, because in the 1600s, African Americans and Native Americans lived in this area, but African Americans were given land when they were given half freedom, what was called half freedom. So the history is complicated, it's phenomenal, and we have to find it, we have to claim it, and we have to explore it. So here's my question for you guys, because you can answer this. Why is Minneapolis such an amazing center for arts and arts activity? How did that happen? Where? It's Minnesota, I don't understand. Sorry, I just got in trouble, sorry.
No. We welcome it all. Do you want to start, Garrison?
Not necessarily, but I did wonder, when did you get there?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I moved to Minnesota when I was in high school, coming from Los Angeles. Oh. My mom's people were from Minnesota.
From where?
From Minnesota. My mother's people are from here.
Minnesota.
Oh yeah, sure, you betcha. And we moved here when I was in high school. But had been visiting here from my childhood. I went to high school, college here. And I think there's a lot of different reasons. There is the history of this land is complicated.
Yes.
I think that it is so important for us to understand the genocide and the land theft that happened to Indigenous people. And I think that one of the things about this community, this is also the home to AIM. And so when I think about powerful political movements, when I think about organizing, and I think about the story and the legacy of Black people in this community, it is one of people who were on the front lines, the frontier of really thinking about what does it mean to hold and not for granted, because we were small in numbers, Black culture and Black life. And I think, and this is very anecdotal, and there's people who are, Sarah Bellamy could talk about this even better than I could, but there are people who are smarter than me, but I suspect that part of why the long legacy of organizing, of grassroots movement work and movement building and artistry was in part because we understood that we needed each other. We could not take for granted that Black community was just going to be here, and we had to actually help and support and sustain each other in that. And of course, there were massive assaults to that life. An interstate right in the middle of the heart of our Black community in St. Paul, not far from where Penumbra Theater is located, causing, to this day, we are still parsing out and having to deal with the reckoning of that trauma, to the police violence that we have in this community. And of course, our community there was an uprising in the 60s on the north side of Minneapolis that was important in terms of like recognizing the history of this place. So I think it's anecdotal to say that I think we knew we needed each other because of our small numbers, but I think that was part of it. And now go ahead, you had a question?
No, I was just going to say that the point you made about the interstate, I'm from Detroit, And 375, all you have to do if you want to know where the Black vibrant business community was, is find out where the interstate is.
Yep.
Because the design of the roads was to disrupt and destroy the communities. As you see, and what you see is this genocidal pattern in our government that starts from the beginning with the landing of certain people coming here from other places, but continuing with basically practicing on whoever comes next. And what you see with African-American communities, where there were thriving communities in Bronzeville, in Chicago, or Indianapolis, everywhere I've been, if you want to know where the Black business community was, the center of the place was, find where the interstate is. And you realize that this destruction has not ended and continues, and it's psychic. And so I think about your farm and the importance of the healing and having places to go where you can start to, number one, unpack it, but number two, to get away from that, because our planet, we're just the climate, we're seeing it, we're understanding it. And when I think about, one of the other things I think about Minneapolis, you talk about George Floyd, but you had Philando Castile, you have so many other names that evoke a kind of
trauma. Black Death is is something that we have come to have to live with and expect. And I think until we get serious about talking about whether it's abolition or whether it's about transformative justice, until we understand the systems that are causing the perpetual harm. You speak to it. I think that part of what art allows us to do, and you said this even, Harrison, and you said someone flies over the Twin Cities, is it allows us to see things in a different way, to see the interconnection of systems that we otherwise can't quite wrap our brains around. But when you do that, when you practice the pretzeling and the stretching of the brain to understand that there is a massive system that is in the service of a small few, I think that's when we can actually begin to create the change that we most need in the world. But you have to have an analysis, otherwise you're fighting a small fight in front of your face, not realizing it is a huge war that is much larger than the individual.
I look at the fact that in this country, people resist the idea of having childcare, having dental care, having elder care, and you kind of go, where are we that this could even be a debate? Where all you hear is a number, 3.5 trillion, but you think to yourself, don't people understand that life is a process, and you will experience at some point every one of these stages of neediness or hunger or needing help, and that we have the wealth and the power. We don't mind, 20 years in Afghanistan, 20 years in Vietnam, 100 and so years in the South of the United States. Basically.
But that's capitalism.
Yeah.
Right. I think that we have to name some of the beasts for what they are: white supremacy, capitalism, patriarchy, homophobia, transphobia, ableism. Like, we have to name the things that we are saying we are not for.
And then struggle with, how do we decolonize not only our consciousness, but take that out into the world we're in. And so that's what I think this conversation is about. In fact, that's what you're doing as artists, as conscious artists. I'm stunned when I see work that only reifies what the culture has taught people about themselves. So when I see a play or something, or I see a film in which there's nothing that you can take from it other than things are okay, and part of the cognitive dissonance that we have in this culture is that we're continually told that things are okay, and they're really, really not on every level. The latest breakdown we saw was the leaving of Afghanistan, a total, utter disaster from day one, the beginning, but to have it put in front of us, and then you do it's like a palimpsest, because all you do is remember back, if you guys are old enough, to Vietnam, the leaving of Vietnam. So in 20 more years, will we leave again? Will we continue to leave? Is that part of, and so we as artists have a responsibility to reconstruct the way we think of each other, because I am responsible for that other person. I have to care about them.
I would hope so. I guess I would just say to it, I think that our relationship with storytelling has been bifurcated. And maybe that's not the right way to say it, but I think that we have put where we connect to story has become to a news cycle and a soundbite, as opposed to a community conversation, as opposed to a ritual, as opposed to a more robust experience with narrative. And so that separation to the quick thing that I can know about that's going to be sensational, that's going to hit me, circumnavigates our broadening of understanding. So I think about police terror and the sheer number of citizens who are murdered by our police extrajudicially throughout this country is actually astronomical.
Yeah.
But we don't have the depth and breadth to really take that in, because it's scary. I understand that. But then maybe this is my optimism, but I do believe that the theater becomes the place, one of the places, it shouldn't be the only place, but it's one of the places where we can engage more fully. I think about Keith Atkins' play about Seneca Village. And I think about so many of these stories, you were just talking about what it meant to be a free Black person in Lower Manhattan, and it makes me think about these stories that allow us to stretch and grow and really understand that there are both historical and contemporary traumas that we need healing from, but we can't heal what we don't know.
The specificity of our learning and of our understanding. I mean, one of the things I just love to think about is the African Grove Theater starts in 1821, but New York State doesn't abolish slavery until 1827. So you see this optimism, this push forward in terms of we're going to create a space where we can do work. In the African Grove Theater, they were doing plays about Black rebellion in the islands. They were doing Shakespeare. They were doing plays about Native Americans that were not stereotypical stories. And so that brings me right into we have questions coming, and I'm going to start to fold it because our time we're there, believe it or not. So the first question that came was, either one of you can take it. What do you think will change in the arts industry as things reopen?
A lot of things. Hopefully. I mean, I think it's a great question, and I would like to think that folks are asking it honestly.
Yes. But
I'm not sure if folks are asking it honestly. I feel like maybe it's being asked a lot because it's what you're supposed to be asking. But I think it's a real interrogation that needs to happen there. And I don't know. On my social media, there's a lot of the Broadway reopening talk, and I think that it's really exciting that theaters are reopening, and Broadway is Broadway. But I do wonder sometimes in the rush, are we allowing that space for real change? I mean, I think that we've been talking about this whole conversation. I mean, if the rush is to just get the doors back open, but we didn't necessarily do work while the doors were closed, then I don't know that the space is going to, I mean, it hasn't been redecorated, it hasn't been gutted, it hasn't maybe even been dusted until right before folks stream back in. So I don't know. I get nervous that maybe things will be exactly the same. I don't know, Signe, do you have thoughts about change in the American theater.
I think you said it well.
Yeah.
I'll just offer an analogy to say that, water is really powerful. I think we've seen that both in climate change, and we knew it before that water can carve rock. And if I think about the power of a river, to take your last name to this analogy moment, that river is very powerful. And just because we want the river to reorient doesn't mean that it will. We can't will that river into a different orientation. And so my question for all of us, myself included, particularly as a theater leader now, is what are the stones that I'm placing, that I'm carving, that I'm moving? And that's a lot of labor to redirect water in a different way, and to do it not from a place of extraction, but as a place of regeneration. And I think that, I think you're 100% right, but I think that if people and institutions haven't prepared for the enormity of the shift that has to happen. And I'll say one other thing about it too, that is maybe the only addition beyond what you shared, which is to say, I think we need to prepare for failure. I think we need to say we're going to get it wrong, but we're going to keep trying, because the status quo has had a long time to create that river and has fortified itself. We know this, that institutions survive all kinds of traumas that they probably shouldn't, but do. They persist. And so I think we need to give ourselves permission to get it wrong, with the understanding that the more we get it wrong, the closer we might get to getting it right.
That really hit me when you talked about water, because this morning I was reading an article in the New York Times, and it talks about how in the Netherlands, instead of when they knew the rains were coming, so instead of trying to build more dams and dikes, they created spaces for the water to go. It's a low-lying country, and this has been the way this country has survived. And I think about our kind of, we saw in New Orleans, the levees protected certain parts of that part of the world, but other parts, that whole notion of protection was like, well, we don't have to think about that. And now I think we're starting to understand communally, or we should be. And you have to ask yourself, why are people not understanding that we have to protect each other? I am part of that community, even though I'm in New York right now, we're okay, but hurricane season just started, you know what I'm saying? And so that's my consciousness, and so I have another question. I'll stop talking because I want to get to this other question.
Can I just say on the
Please.
subject of interconnectedness, I do think that is something that storytelling does, like that stories connect us. And I do think, Signe, what you were saying about that disconnect, that sort of, we've been disconnected from the sort of story wellspring, the sort of narrative wellspring. And I do think that that disconnection then leads to the sort of siloing, to sort of like me and my story and my narrative here, which has nothing to do with you and your story and your narrative there, which has really nothing to do with their narrative over there, which we know isn't true. But if those stories aren't passing, I do think that it becomes harder for us to imagine the connection that intrinsically exists. But it also takes work to sort of make that intrinsic thing a thing you can hold in your hand or embrace, So I just on that idea of disconnection and interconnectedness, and I feel like stories are a part of that too.
I love that you said work, because I think one of the things we get confused, work is worship. And so what you choose to do, what you choose to create is really, again, creating consciousness. I think it goes back to the point that Signe was talking about, that we dreamt this up and we said this. So here's the next question. Oh, this is going to take us out, guys. When you think about where we were last year at this time and where we are today, and I'm going to change a little bit, what have you learned? Where do you feel that time gave you the reflective energy you needed, and how do you manage to live and lead with hope? So. So just think, who were you? How did this impact you? How does it take you forward? And because there was a time where we had to all stop.
That was not my experience.
Coming.
I did not stop working. As a frontline activist, as an organizer working for Black Liberation, this year has been strenuous and has stretched the parameters of what can be done in a 24-hour period.
Yeah.
So I did not get personally the pause that I know other people speak to, and I am grateful for the pause that they had, but that was not my experience. Nor was it the experience of the cohort of people around me who spent this time trying to build the alternatives so that we could love each other in safe community, so that we could survive. So I would say what I have learned in the last year is how powerful we can be as a community, how strong, how beautiful. All the things I knew before have just been further evidenced in the work that I have been blessed to be adjacent to or a part of. And that for some of us, we need to take that rest because we didn't have it in the last year.
So now that's the farm. That's where we started. Talking about the farm and how important it is, because Signe, you gotta go. You gotta go.
I steward it, Michael. So it's more work for me.
Oh, no.
It's not my residence.
Well, I'll come and rest there.
Harrison is gonna help me.
Harrison, did you want to talk to any of these questions that came up?
I think actually my experience was similar. I think that this past year was in some respects, it was a year of great opportunity and a year of stepping into opportunity, because it felt like the opportunity was there, and I was in a place where I felt like I had something to bring to that opportunity. And yes. maybe what I had to bring has been sort of being stored up for a very long time, and hasn't had all the places to go. And so
the river.
So I do
the Harrison
feel like
River.
It's been a year of rigor, and a year of constant, and a year of I think similarly like finding that cohort, those collaborators, those other folks who are making and building alongside, and the sort of comfort and celebration and support that we can give each other. But what I've learned is that I actually do need a rest, and so I will be farming because
milking the cows.
And also I do wonder, I feel like I get a little bit in a mode, and like it is a 24/7 365 work mode, and any moment where I'm not moving something forward that has been sort of set there to move, that should move, right? It should move forward. Any moment that I'm not doing that feels, on my worst days, it's a wasted moment, which is not true. And I know that, but I do think that is like my first impulse is there is work to be done. You are not doing the work, when actually, perhaps not doing that work would be good work for me to be doing in order to, so those are the things that I am, and it's great. This is great that I am being asked to name them here in a very public way. So also, folks, hold me accountable, please.
Yes.
Because
together. Harrison and I together.
Right. There we go.
This is a place. There was a last question, and I'm going to answer it for all of us. It says, what are your hopes for Black artists on Broadway? And my hopes for Black artists are that we will have the space to be able to tell the true stories of our existence and our lives, that we will have the support of these institutions, that we will build institutions that will do that for us as well, and that the work of Signe and Harrison continues to open up new ways of thinking and being so that we can advance, that we can all advance this whole culture. So our time is up. It's been a great conversation. I really have enjoyed meeting you, and I'm sure we're going to keep talking. And at this point, I say good night.
Blessings to you and your people.
Thank you. Thank you.